So do deficits matter? Well, apparently not to the Republicans, who for years screamed about the debt and the deficits. Now, of course, that they're in charge, deficits. Who cares about deficits, right? We love spending. In fact, we love spending all this money on war and defense and things like that. And look, to be fair, they are actually right when they say deficits don't matter. And they shouldn't matter no matter who's in charge. But I'm going to get to that a little bit later because it gets into what they call MMT. But according to the New York Times, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin has been warning Congress about taking on the federal debt. We got to take on the debt. It's the most important thing in the world. That's what all the rich people care about. That's what all the donors care about. So, yes, we're going to go and we're going to take on the federal debt. But they run into a little bit of a problem. See, the Republicans in Congress, who used to complain about the debt all the time, are going on a spending spree. Now, that's after they just gave $1.5 trillion to the richest Americans and corporations in the form of tax cuts. Now, that, of course, if you're thinking traditionally, leads to less revenue for the government. They write that Mr. Mnuchin's request to raise the debt limit stems from the simple fact that federal spending is far outpacing revenue. The Treasury must borrow money from private investors, but needs congressional approval to go above the $20.5 trillion debt limit that caps the United States debt load. Fiscal hawks warn that mounting federal debt will ultimately slow economic growth, but Washington shows no signs of paying heed. Congress is poised to dole out billions of dollars for a host of different priorities, and the spending spree is being embraced across party lines. So this is right from the New York Times, right? Now, Mr. Trump and Republicans are pushing for a big increase in military spending, plus the Democrats as well, who offer to give them $70 to $80 billion in additional spending towards the military. But they said, warning that the nation's security is at stake. The president wants $25 billion for border security, which, of course, Chuck Schumer had already put on the table. I thought you guys cared about debts and deficits. They continue. That border security, of course, would lead to a wall with Mexico, which is a ridiculous idea. Mnuchin also said on Tuesday that infrastructure would be an administration priority this year. Now, another thing that they're planning on spending money on is doing a infrastructure bill, which they say could garner bipartisan support. And then the White House has signaled that it would seek $200 billion from Congress to jumpstart what they called an infrastructure investment program. Now, look, I'm in favor of an infrastructure program. I've been calling for it for years. Yes, we need to go and rebuild our roads and bridges that are in terrible, terrible shape. Not only that, but we've got pipelines, we've got lead everywhere in the drinking water. It's not just in Flint, it's in many, many other places. And those need to be replaced. And of course, it's going to cost money, right? Now, the thing is, for Trump's infrastructure plan, his plan is to take that $200 billion and just give it to the private corporations. Here you go, have at it. And by the way, I also want to privatize roads and bridges. That means that if you're using a private road, what do you have to do? You have to pay a toll to use that road. Because they're not going to eat those costs. No, they're going to continue sponging money from you every time you want to use a road. And of course, where are they going to use it? They're going to use it on the busiest roads that they can. City roads. Now, of course, there's two problems with that. Number one, of course, you're being charged every time you use a road, which should have been public in the first place. And the second thing is, well, you have these roads that aren't very well traveled, but are important to getting places to places across the country. Well, you think a private corporation is going to want to upkeep that? No, of course not. They're not going to want to spend money and time on fixing those roads, so they're just going to let them fall apart while they focus on the roads that are actually going to make them money. That's how that works. So that's the problem with that infrastructure plan. That's why I'm not in favor. Now, on top of that spending, the party is still celebrating its sweeping overhaul of the tax code, casting aside expectations of how it will impact the national debt. Again, which I don't think actually matters. Now, it's not just Republicans. After loudly bemoaning that the tax overhaul would swell the national debt, Democrats are pressing to secure a sizable boost in spending on domestic programs, including billions of dollars to address the opioid crisis, which we should be doing anyway. And lawmakers from both parties are looking to approve about at least $80 billion in additional aid in response to last year's hurricanes and wildfires. Again, that is something that we should actually be doing. Representative Jim Costa, Democrat of California, and co-chairman of the centrist Blue Dog Coalition, said, quote, "The deep dark secret is Republicans like to spend money just as much as Democrats. They just want to spend it on something different." So let me stop there, because there's more to this article, but I think you guys get the point, right? So he's actually right. Yes, Republicans love to spend money. So do Democrats. That's not a surprise. That shouldn't be a surprise. Fiscal conservative? You're kidding me, right? No, whenever a Republican gets in office, he loves to spend like crazy. But what do they love to spend it on? They love to spend it on the military. They love to spend it on giant corporations. When Democrats get into office, they too also like to spend it on the military, because the Democrats of today love war and are absolutely fine with funding endless war, which of course frustrates progressives to no end, especially me. But they also like to spend a little bit more on the domestic side, and yes, they like to spend on corporations as well. But the thing is that I think they both know that this whole debt and deficit thing, it's just nothing but politics. It's bullshit. And it's actually a right-wing framing. So, look, this is why Republicans love to spend when they're in power, but scream about the debt and deficit when they're not in power, because they know it doesn't mean anything. And let me tell you why. The United States prints and controls its own currency. We can actually run out of money. We're not actually in debt to anybody. It's made up. It's not real. We can't run out of money. I mean, yes, what we can do is we can run out of resources, right? Now, resources can be purchased with money. I understand that. But we can't actually run out of money. We're also the world's reserve currency. So, in reality, when you think about it, debts and deficits actually mean nothing. We could print up another $1 trillion and pay for Medicare for all today. The only thing that we lack is the political will to actually do so. For example, yes, do we have enough doctors? Do we have enough hospitals? Do we have the infrastructure to be able to handle more people going in and using healthcare? I believe we do. The only thing that we would need is actually time to be able to transition and to set things up. We have money because we can print all the money that we want. It's the government can decide to push a button. Here's more money. So this whole idea that we're in debt, that we can go into debt, and that we have to watch out for our deficits and spending, things like that, and that we're going to run out of money and that we're broke, it's bullshit. It's not real. It doesn't exist. Now, what we do instead of actually doing real priorities, and this is where the framing comes into, is that, look, Republicans and Democrats always have more and more money for the military, because they know, again, that we can just print up more money. We can send it to the military-industrial complex. Oh, you need an extra $80 billion so you can go bomb Syria? Here you go. Here you go. So, look, now, what we have, of course, when we give those incentives to companies that make bombs and guns and ships, is that more companies are going to make bombs and guns and ships so they can get access to government money. Now, that's more resources going into things that we don't actually need, into the military-industrial complex, right? If we actually had an incentive for, again, let me use Medicare for All as an example, to build more hospitals and train more staff and nurses, and look, even education, train more teachers and start paying them better, then more industry and more resources would be built up around that. We would instead be using our finite resources, not, for bombing people, but for educating people and making sure that they have health care. So understand that the framing, that this entire discussion of debts and deficits is based on right-wing framing, which is basically being used to ask for, if you try to enact any sort of progressive priority, they can ask, well, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? So, look, again, this is very, very simple when it comes to MMT. And actually, the discussion is there's a lot more to learn about this, but that's sort of the basic, right? So now, of course, there are people that are asking, but Jeff, we're in debt. We're $20 trillion in debt. How can you say that we're not in debt? Well, who are we in debt to? Private interests? We're actually more in debt to ourselves because, again, we print our own money, right? And yes, we're supposed to collect revenue from people through taxes, right? But again, taxes is just about taking money out of circulation. So, or actually taking it out of circulation, or taking it from wealthy people but through taxation, and then putting it back into circulation by redistributing it. So, and again, we have an infinite supply of money, so I guess we could just pay off our debt right now. Push a button, right? But from what I understand, again, the Republicans, they know this, and they decide, no, we want to frame this argument in a way that makes it so that we spend for our own priorities. And our own priorities are, of course, war and helping giant corporations. Their priorities are not, we cannot pay for health care because we just don't have the money. We just don't have the money. No, you don't have the political will to do so. This is not a money problem. It's an allocation problem. And it's a political will problem. Our government chooses to put its resources in where it puts their resources are unfortunately not for regular people. It's not on you. It's not on things we want or need like tuition-free college or single-payer healthcare. It's on bombing people. It's on tax cuts. It's on oil subsidies. And look, a lot of these people, these companies that get all this money, they sit on it, and that leaves, and it takes that money out of circulation. Now, instead of giving tax cuts to very, very rich people, they either need to put that money back into the economy by giving raises, or we as the government, we in the government need to tax them more. So this debt ceiling fight and this debt and deficit thing, again, this is political theater, right? They set a limit of how much they want to spend, and then they keep voting to increase it. But in the end, all it creates is needless political fighting. And I think it's just something that somebody came up with for some reason that they didn't understand, that the government can basically print its own money. Now, the thing is, if we went to a gold standard, then it would be completely different. But since we're not, since we're in a more of a fiat currency and can print our own money, then we can get away with this. But Republicans use these fights to as a way, of course, to get extra concessions on spending priorities from Republicans. This right-wing framing and the total acceptance of it by a lot of Democrats and the populace at large is one of the reasons that we can't have nice things like single payer. I mean, they even talk about the idea that economic growth will slow if we have too much debt. And I don't understand why. There's simply no reason. Again, America can never go broke. No, we don't actually owe the Chinese billions and billions of dollars. They do not own most of our debt. Yes, there is some of it that Chinese investors will buy bonds that loan money to the government. That's not a majority. The majority is actually what we borrow against ourselves. And besides, if we run low on certain resources and we start getting inflation, then you can reduce spending in other places, for example, the military-industrial complex. That frees up resources in the economy for other things, as I explained earlier. As long as we have resources, people, machines, raw materials, and our own currency, there's no reason that we can't actually have nice things in America. The only thing in the way is the lie that Republicans and the right wing have sold us as a way to privatize the government in order to maintain their control over the economy. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.